He was already at my door before I even knew his last name. That's the part that still keeps me up at night. Not the storage unit, not the voicemails, not even the moment I heard my stepmother scream from the driveway. It's the fact that I almost let it happen, that I was 18 years old, heartbroken and reckless, and I handed a predator just enough rope to find me. Let me take you back to where it started. I was 18, and I was a mess. My boyfriend, the one I'd given years of my life to, had fallen in love with someone else. Not just cheated, fallen in love. There's a particular kind of devastation that comes with that distinction, the kind that makes you feel like you were never quite real to someone, like you were just a placeholder while they waited for the person they actually wanted. I didn't handle it well. I stopped caring about a lot of things, including my own safety. I started spending hours on obscure corners of the internet, the kind of social media platforms that most people have never heard of, talking to strangers because strangers felt easier than the people who actually knew me. That's where I met Jack. He seemed normal at first. That's always how it starts, isn't it? He was friendly, attentive, easy to talk to. He said he was from somewhere near my area, which felt like a small comfort. I was careful enough, or so I thought, to list a nearby city on my profile, instead of the actual town where I lived. A small buffer. A thin one, as it turned out. We moved from messaging on the platform to texting, and the conversations flowed easily. We had things in common, or at least he made it seem that way. He was good at that. New Year's Eve arrived and I had nothing. No plans, no boyfriend, no desire to sit alone in my room while the rest of the world counted down to something. Jack suggested we meet at a hotel. Ring in the new year together. Keep it casual. I said yes. Looking back, I can see every red flag I walked past on the way to that hotel room. But at 18 and heartbroken, I was practically blind to them. The first thing he did when I walked in was look at me and ask if I was really 18. I wasn't alarmed. I genuinely wasn't. I've always looked young, absurdly young. I worked retail at the time, and customers would stop me on the floor and ask, completely seriously, whether I was old enough to have a job. It happened so often it had become background noise. So when Jack asked, I just rolled my eyes a little and said yes. When he pushed further and asked me to prove it, to actually show him my driver's license, I pulled it out without much thought. It felt like a formality. Then I asked to see his. He held it up for maybe 2 seconds, just long enough for one number to burn itself into my brain. 1983. I stood there and did the math while keeping my face completely still. Jack was 32 years old. I was 18. He had sought me out on a platform for young people, asked me to verify my age before anything else happened, and he was 32 years old. I spent the next 5 minutes performing normalcy, smiling, nodding, pretending I hadn't just felt the floor shift beneath me. Something had curdled in the air of that room, but I didn't leave. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself lots of things. I saw him 2 more times after that, and each time, the picture became clearer and uglier. He didn't own a car. He lived with his mother and made it immediately clear that I was never, under any circumstances, to come to that house. When he talked about his mother, it wasn't with embarrassment or affection. It was with contempt, the kind of flat, practiced contempt that tells you something is deeply wrong with how a person sees the world. He talked about hating police with an intensity that felt less like a political opinion and more like a personal history. His language was crude in a way that wasn't just casual, it was aggressive, designed to shock, to test how much you'd tolerate. At a concert, while I was mid-conversation with someone else, he slid his hands under my clothes. Not flirtatiously, possessively, like he was reminding me of something. The last time I saw him, he took me to a storage unit. He said it was because we couldn't go to his place. He said it like this was a reasonable alternative. Inside, there was an air mattress on the concrete floor and a plastic container in the corner that he used as a toilet. That was it. That was the space he had prepared. I looked at that air mattress and that container and I understood, in a way that bypassed thought and went straight to instinct, that I needed to never see this man again. I ghosted him completely. Stopped responding to every message, every call, but I didn't block him. Everyone asked me why. Friends, family, anyone I told. They all said the same thing. Just block him. Why won't you block him? And I always gave them the same answer, because it was the only answer that made sense to me. If he ever sent a message saying he was going to hurt me, or that he was coming to find me, I wanted to receive that message. I wanted a record of it. I didn't want his threats disappearing into a void where no one would ever see them. So I left the line open, and he used it. For a year and a half, he texted me in cycles that were almost rhythmic in their instability. Happy 4th of July. Wish you were here with me. Then, hours or days later, you're nothing. You're stupid. You never deserved me. Then, I'm lying here crying thinking about the life we could have had together. Then, I'm so sorry. Please just talk to me. I miss you so much. The voicemails were worse. He left detailed, graphic descriptions of things he wanted to do to me, his voice low and unhurried, like he had all the time in the world. I saved every single one. Then one afternoon at work, I felt it, that specific prickling at the back of the neck that means something is wrong before your eyes have confirmed it. I looked up and I thought I saw him moving through the store. I told myself I was imagining things. I went to the back room and stayed there until the feeling passed. A few months later, it happened again. This time I was certain. I recognized the way he moved, the set of his shoulders. He was walking the floor slowly, methodically, the way someone does when they're looking for something. He didn't see me. I made sure of that. And then a coworker pulled me aside. Someone named Jack came in looking for you, she said. You weren't here that day, so I told him you weren't in. He asked for your schedule. The world went very quiet. She had told him I wasn't there. She hadn't given him my schedule. She had done everything right, and it still felt like the walls were closing in, because he had come to my workplace. He had asked for my schedule. He was trying to find out when I would be there and when I would be alone. That afternoon, a friend drove me to buy pepper spray. On the way there, she asked if I had ever Googled him. I realized I hadn't. It hadn't occurred to me, which seems impossible now, but grief and recklessness have a way of narrowing your vision. I searched his name right there in the passenger seat. The results loaded and I stopped breathing. Article after article. His name, his face, a history that stretched back years. Sexual harassment, threats, assault, strangulation, slashing tires on police vehicles, trespassing, breach of peace, battery, and then the detail that made my hands go cold. He had sent sexually explicit images to underage girls. There were news stories about it. There were court records. There was a mugshot, several, actually, and looking at that face in those photographs. The face I had sat across from in a hotel room, in a storage unit. I felt something I can only describe as the ground opening up beneath me. I had been alone with this man, multiple times. I went home. I got into bed. I was still lying there, still trying to process the scope of what I'd just learned, when my stepmother called from downstairs. Someone named Jack is here for you. I don't fully remember the next 30 seconds. I remember the sound of my own voice telling her everything, fast and urgent, the whole story compressed into a few sentences. I remember her face changing. She went to the door and told him I wasn't home, and he left. That night, I called the police. I handed over every text, every voicemail, every timestamp. The officer who reviewed the voicemails called me back and told me he was deeply disturbed by what he'd heard, that the case was far more serious than what I had conveyed in person. I came in and gave a full statement. They issued a warrant for Jack's arrest, and I was granted a full no-contact protective order. It took them a month and a half to find him. During those 6 weeks, he came back to my workplace more than once. The security cameras caught every. He walked the entire store each time, every department, every aisle, slow and deliberate, the way someone walks a space they're memorizing. The footage was added to the case file, and then came the afternoon that I think about more than any other. It was warm enough to be outside. I was lying on a float in the backyard pool, eyes half closed, letting the sun do what it could for the anxiety that had become my constant companion. My stepmother came out to tell me she was leaving for work and that I'd be home alone. She got in her car. She drove away. A few minutes passed. Maybe 5, maybe less. Then I heard her voice from the front of the house, sharp, urgent, The kind of voice that cuts through everything. And then the words, clear as anything. Get inside right now. Call 911. I didn't think. My body moved before my mind caught up. I rolled off the float, hit the water, and swam to the edge with everything I had. I pulled myself out and ran, soaking wet, barefoot through the back door, locked it, ran to the front door, locked it, ran to my room, and folded myself into the back of my closet in the dark. I sat there dripping onto the hardwood floor, listening to my own heartbeat, listening to my own breathing, listening to the water falling from my hair and my skin in the silence of the house. I didn't get a towel. There was no time for a towel. There was only the closet and the dark and the sound of my own body trying to hold itself together. When my stepmother came back inside, she told me what had happened. On her way to work, she had noticed a car that looked familiar, the same car Jack had been driving the last time he'd shown up at the house. It was a hunch, a gut feeling, something that didn't quite add up. She turned around, she followed him, she came back. If she had been 30 seconds further down the road, if the car had been parked differently, if she had been running late and too distracted to notice, if she had noticed and decided she was probably wrong and kept driving. I don't let myself finish that thought. That was the last time I saw Jack. He was arrested not long after. The case moved toward trial. I still check over my shoulder in parking lots. I still feel my pulse spike when a stranger looks at me a second too long. I still sleep with my phone close and the volume up, because some part of me is still waiting for a message I never want to receive. But I also still have every text, every voicemail, every timestamp, because I never blocked him. There are nights that start out completely ordinary, a late class, a familiar face, a short ride home, and somehow end with you checking every lock in your house twice, hands shaking, heart hammering against your ribs like it's trying to escape. This is one of those nights. I've always had a thing for online quizzes and personality surveys. Not the dating part, never the dating part. I made accounts on a couple of sites purely because they had these elaborate, weirdly specific questionnaires that I found genuinely entertaining. My profile was half-finished and dripping with sarcasm. I wasn't there to meet anyone. I was there to answer questions about which anime character I'd be in a zombie apocalypse. That's how he found me. He sent a message that was polite enough, and I responded the same way, making it crystal clear up front. I'm not here to flirt. I'm not looking for anything. I just like the surveys. He said he understood, and for a while, it actually seemed like he did. We started talking about anime, which shows we'd seen, which ones we'd rewatched 3 times, which ones had genuinely wrecked us emotionally. It turned out we'd both consumed an almost embarrassing amount of it. That became the whole foundation of whatever this was. Not romance. Just 2 people in the same city who had watched too much anime and had opinions about it. Eventually, we decided to meet in person. Same city, same taste in shows. It seemed harmless enough. And at first, it was. He was funny, easy to talk to, the kind of person who could keep a conversation going without it ever feeling forced. But there was something about his eyes that I couldn't quite shake. This restless, unpredictable energy behind them, like you were always one wrong sentence away from something you couldn't take back. I noticed it early and filed it away somewhere in the back of my mind, the way you notice a crack in the ceiling and tell yourself it's probably nothing. He was generous, almost aggressively so. Convention tickets, food, weed, alcohol. He was always showing up with something, and he'd flirt, sometimes pretty openly, and I'd have to steer the conversation back to neutral ground and remind him, again, that I wasn't interested in him that way. He'd back off. Then a few days later, we'd be right back at the same conversation. I kept telling myself it was manageable. I kept telling myself I had it under control. I was in college at the time, and one of my courses that semester, Calculus 3, which is exactly as brutal as it sounds, had a lecture that didn't end until 11:50 at night. It was a strange schedule, the kind that leaves you walking out of a classroom into cold air and darkness, your brain still full of equations, the rest of the world already asleep. He called me earlier that he said he had weed and alcohol, said we should hang out, said he'd even come pick me up from campus when my class was done. It sounded casual. It sounded fine. I said okay. Class ended, and I stood outside waiting while he took his time getting there. When he finally arrived, I suggested we go to this old gym near my house, a quiet spot, mostly empty at that hour, where we could sit and smoke without bothering anyone. We did. It was uneventful. But the weed and alcohol ran out faster than expected, and I told him I needed to head home. Early morning, more classes, the usual. I was exhausted in that specific way you get after a full day of university, followed by a math lecture that ends at midnight. Now, I need to explain something about where I live. My neighborhood is one of those places that exists in a strange pocket of the city. Big houses, wide streets, and absolutely nothing else. No pharmacy, no convenience store, no hospital, no school. Just houses and silence. The walk from the nearest bus stop to my front door takes about 20 minutes at a normal pace, and I don't walk slowly. From where we were sitting, it was closer, maybe 10 minutes on foot. He offered to drive me. I said yes. The moment the car doors closed, something shifted. He moved toward me almost immediately, his hand landing on my thigh like it belonged there. He started asking for things I hadn't offered and wasn't going to. I said no. I said it clearly. I said it more than once. He didn't stop. He kept pushing, kept touching, kept asking, and I kept saying no. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, I told him I just needed to get home, that I was tired, that I had to be up early, anything to redirect, anything to diffuse it. That's when he started undoing his pants. For a second, I froze. My brain went completely blank, the way it does when something happens that it genuinely wasn't prepared for. And then something else kicked in, not logic, not a plan, just pure instinct. Then I grabbed the door handle and got out of the car. I was on the street. The night was quiet. My house was visible in the distance, just a few blocks away, the porch light on like a lighthouse. I started walking fast. Behind me, I heard him shout something. I couldn't make out the words. I didn't want to. I walked faster. Then I heard the engine turn over, and I looked back to see his headlights crawling along the road behind me, the car moving at a slow, deliberate pace, not driving away, following. I ran. I ran down the middle of that empty street with his headlights at my back, my lungs burning, my bag swinging against my hip. I could see my house. I could see the fence. He accelerated slightly, but I was already at the gate, already over it, already sprinting across the yard. I hit the front door, got inside, and locked it. Then I went through every room and locked every window. Then I stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening to the silence outside, waiting to hear tires on the road. I took anxiety medication that night, to get any sleep at all. The next morning, I woke up to a message from him. I know where you live, it said. I know where your friends are. I know which university you attend. And then, almost as an afterthought, by the way, I love that picture of you with the long ears and the high stockings. I sat with that for a long time. I had never posted that picture anywhere online, not on the dating site, not on social media, not anywhere. I had never shown it to him. I had never handed him my phone or let him scroll through my camera roll. There was no version of events in which he should have known that photo existed. I deleted my account that same day. I don't know how long he'd been watching before that night. I don't know what else he saw. I don't know if he was ever actually outside my house in the dark, or if he just wanted me to wonder whether he was. Maybe that was the whole point. Maybe the not knowing was the part he enjoyed most. What I do know is this, that restless, unpredictable look I noticed in his eyes the very first time we met. I should have trusted it. Some instincts exist for a reason. Some cracks in the ceiling are worth paying attention to. The first time I saw her smile, something in my gut twisted, not in the way you'd expect when meeting someone new, but in the way your body warns you before your mind catches up. I didn't listen. I never do. I was 19 years old when I moved to Vancouver for college, dragging 2 overstuffed bags and a head full of anxious optimism into a city that felt enormous and indifferent. I'd spent the previous year as an exchange student in Brazil, and the living arrangements there had been a quiet disaster. Thin walls, unpredictable housemates, a constant low-grade tension that made it hard to sleep. So when I started looking for a place to rent, I had one simple requirement. I wanted a room. Just a room. Access to a kitchen, a bathroom, laundry. I didn't need community. I didn't need warmth. I needed a door I could close. Dolly seemed like the answer to everything. She was a woman in her 50s who had once been a minor celebrity on local television back in the 80s. The kind of person who still carried herself like the cameras might turn on at any moment. She'd divorced a wealthy man and kept the large house in West Vancouver. And to supplement her income, she'd converted the basement into rentable rooms. She was polished, confident, and this is the part that made me feel genuinely safe. She was married to a police officer. I know now how little that means. I know now that a badge on the wall doesn't say anything about what happens behind closed doors. But at 19, it felt like a guarantee. My room was right next to the basement entrance, which suited me perfectly. My class schedule was erratic, early mornings some days, late nights others, and I liked the idea of coming and going without disturbing anyone. When I moved in, there was only one other tenant, an older woman, quiet and sweet, who kept to herself and smiled at me in the hallway. It felt manageable. It felt safe. Dolly mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that one of the remaining rooms would be rented to her goddaughter. More like a niece, really, she said, waving her hand in that vague way people do when family relationships are complicated. She asked if I'd be willing to show the girl around, introduce her to people, help her navigate the bus routes, bring her along to college since we'd be attending the same one. She said she liked that I was bookish and quiet. She thought I'd be a good influence. She mentioned, gently but plainly, that her niece had lived a very hard life, and that there was a possibility she had fetal alcohol syndrome. I said yes without hesitation. Of course I did. I was 19 and I believed that kindness was a simple transaction. You gave it, and the world became a little better. I had no framework yet for the kind of need that doesn't fill, the kind of hunger that consumes everything you offer and reaches for more. Her name was Jennifer. The night she moved in, I took her out to some event. I can't even remember what it was now. Something on campus, something forgettable. What I do remember is sitting across from her and listening as she talked about her life with a kind of raw, unguarded openness that felt almost violent in its honesty. Her mother had been a heavy drinker. The men who had cycled through their home, a series of stepfathers, each one worse than the last, had done things to both of them that Jennifer described in a flat, matter-of-fact tone that was somehow more disturbing than tears would have. She told me that in elementary school, she had been separated from the other children because she'd been caught trying to molest them. She said it the way you might mention a bad grade or a missed bus. Just a thing that had happened. Just part of the story. I sat there and felt my heart crack open. She said she just wanted to feel loved. She said she just wanted a normal life. And I looked at this girl with her wide, eager eyes and her enormous smile. Those huge, prominent teeth that seemed almost too large for her face. Always on display, always performing happiness. And I thought, I can help her. I can be the person who gives her a chance. That was my first mistake, not the last. I started taking her everywhere. My small circle of friends absorbed her without complaint. I showed her the bus routes, walked her through the campus, introduced her to the rhythms of a life that felt ordinary to me, but must have seemed like another world to her. I was so focused on being useful that I didn't notice, at first, the small shifts happening around me. She stopped wearing sweatpants. She started wearing dress pants, the same kind I wore. I had a thing for turtlenecks at the time, a personal quirk I'd never thought much about, and one day I looked over and she was wearing one. Then another after that. My hair was long, styled in that wavy, layered cut that was fashionable in the late 90s, and she came home one afternoon with a haircut that mirrored mine as closely as her shorter brown hair would allow. She started using my phrases, my particular verbal tics, the odd little sayings I'd repeat without thinking. She started wearing glasses with frames nearly identical to mine. I didn't notice. I want to be honest about that. I genuinely did not notice, because the idea that someone would want to look like me, unremarkable, bookish, perpetually anxious me, simply didn't register as a possibility. It didn't fit into any category of threat I recognized. The dinner was when things began to shift into something I couldn't ignore. I hosted a lasagna dinner in the basement, which was technically against the rules. Dolly didn't want gatherings in the common areas after a certain hour. I'd rationalized it by telling myself everyone would be gone by 9, that it was barely a gathering at all. I was already stressed about it, already half expecting Dolly to appear at the top of the stairs with that particular expression she had when something displeased her. Jennifer helped me cook. I'd invited a friend named Ishrat and the person I was casually seeing at the time. During dinner, Jennifer's attention fixed on Ishrat with an intensity I noticed, but didn't think much about. There was nothing romantic between Ishrat and me. He was a friend, a tall, gentle man who gave gifts too freely and laughed too easily, and so I felt no particular stake in where Jennifer directed her interest. I probably even encouraged it through my own indifference, the way you can accidentally open a door just by not thinking to close it. It was only recently, years later, that I found a photograph from that dinner. I stared at it for a long time. Jennifer and I are sitting at the same table, and the resemblance is startling, not because we looked alike naturally, but because she had constructed the similarity so carefully. The glasses, the turtleneck, the hair, the way she was angling her body, her posture, even the tilt of her head. I felt something cold move through me when I saw it. I set the photo down and didn't pick it up again. A few weeks after the dinner, she asked me to go to a party. She'd made friends at school, a group of foreign students sharing an apartment downtown, and she had a crush on one of them. She was too young to go to bars, and Dolly had made it clear she preferred Jennifer not to go out at night unless I was with her. So she came to my room and asked, with those wide eyes and that enormous smile, if I would please come along, just so she wasn't alone, just so she felt safe. I went. The apartment was small and the party was just us and these men, which I registered as strange but not yet alarming. Jennifer drank heavily and quickly, the way people do when they're trying to outrun something. I stayed mostly sober, watching the clock, calculating bus schedules in my head. Vancouver's transit system shut down after midnight, and getting back to West Vancouver from downtown meant a 2-hour ride, followed by a 1.5-mile climb up a steep hill. I mentioned this to Jennifer. I told her we needed to think about leaving. She grabbed my arm. "Please don't go," she said. "He's actually interested in me tonight. I can feel it. Please stay. You're like the sister I never had." And then she disappeared into a bedroom with him and closed the door. I stood in the living room with 2 men I didn't know, in an apartment I didn't want to be in, at an hour when I had no way to leave. It became clear very quickly that they had been told by Jennifer that I was just like her, that I was there for the same reasons she was. I had to be forceful and explicit in a way that made my skin crawl, repeating myself while they looked at me with expressions that ranged from confusion to contempt. One of them called me names when I refused. I told him I didn't care what he called me. I couldn't leave. I had no money for a cab, no credit card, no way to get home. So I lay on the couch in my jacket, fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling while the city hummed outside and the hours moved like cold water. I didn't sleep. I just waited, rigid and furious, for the buses to start running again. When I finally knocked on the bedroom door in the gray early morning, Jennifer emerged rumpled and half-dressed, blinking at me with an expression of drowsy contentment that made me want to scream. We stood at the bus stop in the rain for an hour. Vancouver rain, that particular kind of fine, relentless mist that soaks through everything. "Wasn't that fun?" she asked. I looked at her. "No," I said. "I'm going home to sleep, and I'm never going back there." After that, I pulled away. I came home from class and went straight to my room. When Dolly asked me where Jennifer was, she'd been absent for days, apparently sleeping at the apartment downtown. I told her I had no idea and that it wasn't my concern. I had finally understood, in the blunt and clarifying way that exhaustion sometimes brings, that I had been used, that both Jennifer and Dolly, in their different ways, had maneuvered me into a role. Jennifer eventually came back when the man she'd been staying with lost interest. I was in my room studying when I heard the knock. I opened the door and found her standing there, beaming, radiant with a kind of triumphant energy, I didn't immediately understand. She was wearing an expensive leather jacket I'd never seen before. Her hair had been freshly cut and styled. And standing beside her, looking sheepish in the way that only a very tall man can look sheepish, all folded limbs and averted eyes, was Ishrat. She was holding a CD I recognized. It was one I had lent to Ishrat weeks earlier, one I'd actually been meaning to ask him to return. "We're together," she announced, with the particular brightness of someone delivering news they expect to wound. I looked at Ishrat. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. I said, "Congratulations," in a tone that I intended to be neutral and apparently landed somewhere else entirely, because I learned later that she had been furious. She had wanted jealousy. She had wanted me to flinch. What I didn't know then, what Ishrat told me much later, was the story she had been telling him about me. That I was jealous of her. That I had always wanted to be like her. That at the party downtown, I had thrown myself at those men, and she had been embarrassed by my behavior. She had been constructing a version of me, a shadow me, and feeding it to the people around us. She talked about me constantly, he said. Constantly. I never saw Jennifer again after that day. I left the rooming house at the end of the semester and didn't look back. But Ishrat kept me loosely updated over the years. The way you pass along news about a mutual acquaintance, not because it matters, but because it's strange enough to be worth mentioning. He and Jennifer dated for a few months. He ended the relationship after he caught her attempting to reinsert a used condom into herself, trying to get pregnant without his knowledge. After that, she drifted. She continued dressing in ways that echoed how I used to dress. She grew her hair out longer. Then she turned 18, and one of her old stepfathers showed up at her birthday party. She left with him. They went to a small town somewhere in the Rockies, and whatever happened there, she called Ishrat occasionally to report on her life, in that flat, matter-of-fact way she had. She was being passed between men. With one of them, she got pregnant. After the baby was born, she called Ishrat to tell him about it. "Guess what day the baby was born?" she said. He said he had no idea. "It was born on her birthday," Jennifer told him. "She meant my birthday." Isn't that amazing? She was proud. Genuinely, unmistakably proud. That was the last update I ever received. Years have passed since then, and I've heard nothing more. Jennifer has receded into the past, into the category of things I survived without fully understanding. But sometimes in a crowded hallway, on a busy street, in the peripheral blur of a shopping mall, I catch a glimpse of someone, a woman in a turtleneck, with long wavy hair and large framed glasses, turning toward me with a wide smile full of enormous teeth. And for just a fraction of a second, before my rational mind reasserts itself, my body goes cold. It's never her. It's never her. But the cold stays for a while, regardless. The first time I realized something was deeply wrong, I was standing in my own apartment at 5 in the morning, staring at a photograph on a stranger's phone screen. A photograph of the outside of my house, taken in the dark, time-stamped 4:53 a.m. He had been out there, watching, and I had never known, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because this story didn't begin with a photograph. It began with a video game. I was 16 years old in 2013, and League of Legends was basically my entire personality. I was deep in Facebook groups, hunting for people to duo queue with, debating item builds at midnight, the whole obsessive teenage gamer experience. That's the world where I first encountered Gabriel. He lived in a city not far from mine, and we had a mutual friend, a girl named Valerie, who lived just around the corner from me. She introduced us in one of those groups, and we started talking on Facebook, then Skype, then eventually playing together. He seemed normal, funny, even. The kind of person who was easy to talk to. When Valerie's birthday came around, I went to her party. It was close enough to walk to, so why not? Gabriel was there in person for the first time. We clicked immediately. The kind of easy, effortless connection that feels rare when you're a teenager who doesn't quite fit in anywhere. But later that night, he tried to steer me into a dark room alone. I knew exactly what that was about. I told him no, reminded him I had a boyfriend, and that was the end of it. Or so I thought. Over the following months, he became a fixture in my life. I didn't have many close friends, and Gabriel filled that space quickly and completely. He'd make the drive to my city regularly, stay over at my house, and we'd spend entire days together, watching shows, gaming, cooking dinner, talking about everything and nothing. It felt like genuine friendship. It felt safe. Looking back now, I can see the architecture of what he was building, but at the time I was just grateful to have someone. The shift was so gradual that I barely registered it happening. That's the thing about this kind of person. They don't flip a switch. They turn a dial so slowly that by the time the temperature is unbearable, you've already adjusted to the heat. It really began in 2016, right after my mother died. Grief does something to your defenses. It hollows you out and leaves you raw and desperate for comfort. And Gabriel was right there, ready to provide it. But the comfort came wrapped in something else. He started touching me in ways that could always be explained away. An arm around my shoulder that lingered too long, a hand on my back that drifted. He began greeting me with kisses that landed just a little too close to my mouth, close enough to be unsettling but not close enough to be undeniable. He'd compliment me and then immediately undercut it, saying things like, "You're so beautiful, if only you'd lose a little weight." He said it with a smile, like it was affection. It was. He started working on my perception of everyone around me. My exes were terrible people, he'd remind me. My friends didn't really care about me. He'd plant these seeds casually, in passing, and then water them over weeks and months, until I genuinely started to believe them. I found out later that he'd been making bets with people about how long my relationships would last, before my partners left me. He was engineering my isolation while pretending to be my only real support. By 2019, I had finally managed to move into my own place. I invited Gabriel over to help me get organized. Boxes to unpack, furniture to arrange, the usual chaos of a new apartment. He helped, and when it was time for him to leave, something shifted in the room. He grabbed my face, not gently, hard, with both hands, and tried to kiss me. I pulled back. He held on. I had to physically duck under his arm to get free, twisting away from him like I was escaping something. We stood there in the hallway staring at each other, and then he left without a word. He apologized a week later, and because he was the only person I had, I forgave him. I know how that sounds. I knew how it sounded even then. But loneliness makes you negotiate with things you shouldn't. Then the pandemic arrived, and the world collapsed inward, and Gabriel happened to be staying at a friend's place just a few blocks from my apartment. He asked if I'd come over to help him dye his hair blue, which was such a mundane, harmless request that I said yes without thinking. That's when I met his group of friends. They were wonderful. Genuinely, immediately wonderful. The kind of people you feel like you've known for years within the first hour. We played board games, stayed up until 3 in the morning talking, laughed until our sides. I started spending more and more time with them, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Gabriel hated it. He started getting visibly upset when I chose to spend time with the group instead of him alone. Then one of the guys pulled me aside and told me something that made my stomach drop. Gabriel had pressured him into showing our private messages, convinced that something romantic was happening between us. He was monitoring me, checking up on me, and when he didn't find what he was looking for, it didn't reassure him, it just made him angrier. Something changed in his face around that time. I don't know how else to describe it except to say that his eyes went dark. Not metaphorically, there was a flatness behind them that hadn't been there before, like something had stepped back from the surface. His behavior became erratic and unpredictable, and then he told me he had multiple personalities. He said one of them was named Mark. Mark was the one who kept trying to touch me, who pushed boundaries in ways that left me feeling sick and violated. Another was Carl, slick, overconfident, the kind of persona that made your skin crawl. One night, speaking as Mark, he told me a story about meeting a girl at a bus stop in the middle of the night and having sex with her. He told it like it was something to be proud of. I sat there listening, and something in the story felt deeply wrong. What woman willingly sleeps with a stranger at a dark, empty bus stop in the middle of the night? Was he lying to seem dangerous? Was he bragging about something that wasn't consensual? I didn't know, and not knowing was its own kind of horror. Things continued to deteriorate. He told me he was depressed. Then, out of nowhere, he accused me of stealing his mother's credit card. I had never been to his city. I had never met his mother. The accusation was so absurd it almost felt like a test, like he was watching to see how I'd react, whether I'd crumble or fight back. Then came the night that changed everything. I had an emergency and needed someone to watch my dog. Gabriel offered. I came home early the next morning to find the apartment clean and him sitting there calmly. He said hello and left. Normal enough, except his Facebook account was still logged in on my computer. I don't know what made me look. Some instinct, some quiet alarm that had been ringing in the back of my mind for years. I sat down and I read. He was messaging one of our mutual friends, calling me a slut, raging about how I gave my attention to everyone except him, and saying, and I remember this exactly, that the least I could do was sleep with him. Like I owed him my body as payment for his friendship. I kept reading. I found a photo he had sent to someone else. It was taken from outside. It showed the front of my building, my windows, my door. The timestamp read 4:53 a.m. He had been standing outside my home in the dark, in the middle of the night, taking pictures, and I had been asleep inside, completely unaware. I kept digging, and the more I found, the colder I felt. He had been messaging dozens of women, using my personal trauma, things I had told him in confidence, things about my grief and my past and my pain, as tools to make himself seem sympathetic. He had told everyone my private business. And then I found a conversation with a woman we both knew, and what I read there made me feel physically ill. He had told her we were in a long-term relationship, that I had cheated on him, that I had apologized, that we lived together, that I was toxic and manipulative. I reached out to her immediately. She told me she had always found it strange that he claimed we were together, but had never once posted a photo of us, never mentioned me in any way that felt real. And then she told me something else. Years earlier, he had borrowed her phone. While she was in the shower, he had used it to forward her private photos to himself. He only forgot to delete the sent message. She had discovered it by accident. That's when I understood. I had noticed, months before, that a folder on my phone had been opened, a folder I never accessed, one that was password protected and contained photos I had never shared with anyone. The folder had been opened. The password had been bypassed somehow. I had pushed the thought away because it was too disturbing to sit with. Now I couldn't push it away anymore. I cut him off completely. I blocked him on every platform, every number, every account I knew about. I told our mutual friends what had happened. And I sent him one final message, not out of anger, but because I felt he deserved to know exactly why I was disappearing from his life. I laid it out clearly and then I was done. A year passed. Then a new account appeared in my messages. It started like an apology, just for a moment, just long enough to make me think maybe something had changed. Then it turned. He said I had ruined his life. He said I should be proud of myself for pushing him into depression. He said I had lied about our relationship, that we had been together, that he had loved me, that I had destroyed him. I blocked him again. I haven't heard from him since. But I still think about that photograph sometimes. The timestamp, the darkness outside my window, the fact that I was sleeping just a few feet away, completely trusting, completely unaware that someone I called my best friend was standing in the street below, watching. So, Gabriel, or Mark, or Carl, or whoever you are on any given night, I have one thing left to say to you. Let's never meet again. The door handle moved. That's the part I still think about. Not the man in the white shirt. Not my dog losing her mind upstairs. Not even my dad's voice dropping an octave in the dark. It's that door handle, the slow, deliberate jiggle of metal against metal, that still wakes me up sometimes at 3 in the morning, heart slamming against my ribs like it's trying to get out. I was 14, maybe 15, old enough to know better than to be awake at that hour, young enough not to care. The basement was my kingdom after midnight. I'd drag a blanket down there, fire up the PlayStation, and disappear into whatever game had me hooked that week. My parents were asleep. The house was quiet. The world outside didn't exist. That's the thing about basements. They make you feel insulated from everything. No windows to the street, just the hum of the console and the glow of the screen and the comfortable illusion that nothing can reach you down there. Our house had an unusual layout. Most people came in through the front door, the one that faced the street, the one with the porch light and the welcome mat. But if you pulled into the driveway, there was a second entrance, a set of doors tucked along the side of the house that opened almost directly into the basement. It was the door we used when we came home with groceries, the door the dog would scratch at when she wanted back inside, the kind of door you stop thinking about because you've used it 1,000 times. I hadn't locked it that night. I didn't realize that yet. I was still in my basement bubble, controller in hand, thinking about nothing more threatening than whether I had enough snacks to last another hour. It was somewhere between 3 and 4 in the morning when my dog started barking upstairs. She barked sometimes. All dogs do. A car rolling past, a raccoon in the yard, a branch scraping the siding, any of it could set her off. I'd learned to tune it out. But this wasn't her usual bark. This was sustained, frantic, the kind of barking that has a direction to it, like she was tracking something, following it with her nose pressed to the window. I'd listened to too many horror stories by that point. That was genuinely my first thought. Not that something was wrong, but that I'd conditioned myself to be afraid of exactly this kind of thing. I almost laughed at myself. Almost. I saved my game, turned off the console, and headed upstairs. The house was dark except for the thin blue light coming from under my parents' door. I was halfway down the hallway toward my own room when something in my peripheral vision stopped me cold. Movement. Outside the window at the end of the hall, something had shifted in the front yard. I pressed myself against the wall and looked out. The yard was empty. Just the lawn, the front path, the street beyond. The porch light threw a pale circle over the walkway. Nothing moved. I told myself I'd imagined it. I told myself the dog had gotten into my head. Then my dad's voice came from downstairs. He wasn't yelling exactly, but his voice had dropped into a register I'd never heard from him before. Flat. Controlled. The voice of a man choosing his words very carefully. "Hey, can I help you?" The adrenaline hit me like cold water. Every hair on my arm stood up. I pressed closer to the window and stared out at the front yard, ears straining so hard they ached. I couldn't make out a response, just my dad's voice again. A few seconds later, harder this time. "Sorry, you've got the wrong house. Get off my property, now." And then I saw him. A man came back into the frame of the window. White sleeveless shirt, cargo pants, moving with a strange, unsteady quality. Not drunk exactly, but unmoored, like someone who couldn't quite remember where they were going or why. He stepped off our front path onto the street, then stopped, then stepped back onto the path. He stood there for a moment, head turning slowly, as if he was calculating something. That's when it hit me. The basement door, the side entrance, the one I'd used 100 times without thinking, the one I had absolutely not locked tonight. I don't remember deciding to move. I just remember being at the top of the basement stairs, then at the bottom, then crossing the floor in the dark with my pulse so loud in my ears I could barely hear anything else. My hand found the deadbolt. I turned it. The click it made was the best sound I'd ever heard in my life. I stood there in the dark, breathing, trying to slow my heart down, telling myself it was over. The door was locked. My dad had sent him away. Everything was fine. I took one step back toward the stairs. The handle moved. Not a knock, not a bang. Just a slow, quiet, exploratory turn. The kind of movement that belongs to someone who doesn't want to be heard. Someone testing. Someone who had walked around the side of the house in the dark and found the door and was now, very calmly, trying to open it. I didn't look back. I didn't breathe. I just ran. Up the stairs, down the hall, straight into my parents' room. My dad was already on the phone with the police, his voice still carrying that same controlled flatness. My mom was sitting up in bed, wide awake. Nobody said much. We just waited. The cops arrived about 30 minutes later. They swept the neighborhood, checked the surrounding streets, and eventually found a man hiding in an empty house down the road, one of those properties sitting vacant while it waited to be sold. dark windows, no furniture, the kind of place that's easy to disappear into if you know what you're doing. The next morning, the local paper ran the story, an escaped convict from the maximum security prison nearby. Some kind of administrative error, a clerical mix-up, they said, as if that explained anything, as if that made it smaller. The wrong person had been released. He'd been out there in the dark, in our neighborhood, trying doors. They caught him. The paper confirmed that much. What it didn't say was where they found him, or how long he'd been out, or how many other doors he'd tried before he found ours. I still think about that sometimes. The way he stood on the path, turning slowly, like he was deciding. The way the handle moved, not violently, not desperately, but with a horrible patience, like he had all the time in the world, like he knew someone was home.